The dinner rush at the Gilded Cage always carried a quiet tension, but tonight the air felt wired, as if the chandeliers themselves were holding their breath. Near the velvet-roped corner booth, Sarah Miller moved with practiced silence, her apron faded, her eyes worn yet alert. She had survived too many nights like this, nights where the wealthy spoke freely because they believed the staff didn't matter. At table 7, Arthur Sterling leaned forward, jaw locked, his voice low enough to hide the panic beneath it. "We lose that handshake protocol, Paul, and we lose the merger. 100 million. Gone." Paul Cross rubbed his temples, sweat beading at his hairline. "We've tried everything. The loop won't break. It's impossible." Sarah's hand paused mid-pour. "Loop." The word sliced straight through her exhaustion. She didn't look at them, but her pulse jumped. She knew this problem. She shouldn't. Not here. Not anymore. Then Paul snapped his fingers at her without lifting his gaze. "Water. Now." His dismissiveness hit harder than the command. And in that moment, standing between crystal glasses and two men who thought she was invisible, Sarah understood the dangerous truth. She might be the only person in this room who saw the exit from their disaster. And once she spoke, nothing in their world, or hers, would stay the same. Like the tension already. Hit like and subscribe to Canada's Heartfelt Tales so you don't miss what happens next. The crash of a glass hitting the floor snapped every head in the restaurant toward the velvet-roped booth. Sarah Miller stood frozen beside the toppled wine goblet, the crimson stain spreading across the white linen like a wound. Her pulse hammered in her ears, drowning out the gasps of onlookers. She had meant to step away quietly, to disappear back into the rhythm of service, but one misstep had shattered the fragile invisibility she relied on. Paul Cross pushed back his chair, fury twisting his features. "Are you blind?" he hissed, brushing the wine from his suit sleeve. "Do your job and stay out of conversations you don't understand." Sarah kept her eyes down, but the humiliation stung deeper than the sharp smell of spilled Cabernet. She whispered an apology, reaching for a towel. Arthur Sterling lifted one hand, stopping her. "Leave it," he said, the weariness in his voice heavier than the mess on the table. "Just go." But as Sarah turned to retreat, her gaze caught the lines of code still glowing on Paul's tablet screen. Recursive loop. Red-labeled errors. Timestamp mismatches. She hadn't meant to see it. She definitely wasn't supposed to understand it. Yet the problem unfolded in her mind with terrifying clarity, the way numbers had always done since she was a child, solving patterns faster than teachers could hand them out. Arthur exhaled sharply. "We're hours away from the Asian market's opening, and this is the solution? Panic and accusations." Paul glared at him. "We've exhausted every option. The team is running simulations until their eyes bleed. The system can't stabilize." Sarah's hand tightened around the towel. She shouldn't speak. She needed the tips tonight. Rent was due. Lily's medication was half a paycheck. Silence was survival. But something inside her, anger, desperation, or the stubborn truth that she actually knew the answer, pulled her back toward the table. "Sir," she said softly, "your loop isn't failing because of complexity. It's failing because it thinks the packet already arrived. You're forcing the data through a door that won't open." Paul blinked, as if a fly had spoken. "What did you just say?" She swallowed hard. "If you send a null packet ahead of it, just a placeholder, the security layer opens. The real data follows." The table went silent. Arthur leaned forward. "Why would you think that?" "It's just logic," she murmured. "A ghost variable. You let the system believe the door isn't locked." Paul let out a sharp laugh. "Ghost variable. Cute. Maybe you should stick to carrying plates." But Arthur didn't laugh. He studied Sarah, really studied her, as if seeing the outline of someone he had overlooked for far too long. "Write it down." "What?" Sarah whispered. "You said it clearly. Write it." Her hands trembled as she reached for a receipt from her apron and scribbled the sequence that lived in her mind like breathing. 12 characters. Clean. Precise. Dangerous. When she slid the paper toward Arthur, His eyes narrowed at the arithmetic elegance of it. "Paul," he said. "Test it." Paul sputtered. "This is absurd. A waitress cannot test it." Reluctantly, Paul typed the sequence into the code window. The loading bar crawled. 10%, 30, 50. A brittle quiet stretched across the booth. Then the screen flashed green. Merge complete. Paul froze. Arthur didn't. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping back. "You," he said, pointing at Sarah, "are coming with me." The shift in the restaurant was immediate. Diners leaned in. Henderson appeared out of nowhere, sputtering apologies. But Arthur's voice cut through everything. "She's not cleaning another table tonight." At Apex Systems headquarters the next morning, frost glittered across the plaza concrete, catching in Sarah's hair as she hurried inside with the temporary badge Arthur had issued her. She had barely slept, stunned by the whirlwind of being escorted out of the restaurant and into a chauffeured car while Henderson looked as if his world had inverted. Inside the glass tower, she stepped into an elevator that shot upward with a quiet hum. Her reflection stared back at her. Tired eyes, thrift store blazer, a knot of fear twisting beneath her ribs. Jessica, Arthur's assistant, met her at the top floor. "They're waiting for you," she whispered. "All of them." Sarah followed her into a boardroom where 12 powerful figures sat like marble statues, each turning with measured skepticism as she entered. Paul stood at the far end of the table, a self-satisfied smirk on his face. He didn't waste a second. "I've taken the liberty of running a background check," he announced, tapping a button. A digital screen flickered to life behind him. Sarah Miller, former MIT student. Dropped out. Spotty employment. Nothing in her file that indicates she should be anywhere near our systems. The murmurs sharpened, slicing towards Sarah like blades. Heat surged through her face. She glanced at Arthur, but his expression was unreadable. Paul continued, "Do we really want to trust our infrastructure to someone who couldn't finish her degree?" The words dug deep, but something inside Sarah refused to fold. She lifted her chin. "I didn't leave because I failed," she said quietly. "I left because my sister was dying, and I was the only person she had." The boardroom stilled. Even the projector hummed softer. "I spent years working tables, not because I lacked ability, but because survival demanded it." Arthur's gaze softened, but Paul scoffed loudly. "Touching. But talent without discipline is nothing." His arrogance lit a fire inside her she hadn't felt in years. "Then test me," she said. The room shifted. Arthur leaned forward. "What are you proposing? Give me a problem your team can't solve. Right now." Paul's face flushed with irritation, but the board seemed intrigued. He projected a dense wall of code, an encryption protocol the company had been refining for months. "Reduce latency under 100 milliseconds. We've tried everything." Sarah approached the whiteboard and studied the code. She didn't touch the marker for nearly a minute. The room held still, suspended. Then she lifted the pen and drew the flaw. "You're rotating the key every cycle," she said. "That's your bottleneck." "That rotation is essential," Paul snapped. "Not if the key is split," she countered, outlining the structure. One half in the header, one half on the destination server. They meet only when the packet arrives. A quiet voice from the back spoke up. "Patel, head of encryption." "She's right." Paul's mouth fell open. Sarah stepped back. "I'm not asking you to trust my resume. I'm asking you to trust the logic." Arthur's decision was instant. "Give her an office." Paul's face tightened, the first crack in his polished arrogance. The office he assigned her, a glass cube on the 30th floor, felt more like a cage than a workspace. No team. Limited credentials. Whispering engineers passing by with sidelong glances. "The Waitress VP," they muttered. Sarah buried herself in the log data from the merger crash, uneasy about the anomaly she couldn't shake. The loop hadn't been a failure. It had been a cover. Hours passed as she dug deeper, her instincts humming with quiet dread. Then she found it. During the supposed crash, data hadn't stopped flowing, it had surged outward. Terabytes. Redirected. Routed through offshore servers. Her breath hitched. Someone had used the crisis to siphon Apex's most valuable algorithm. Only one person had the authority. A cold determination flowed through her. She bypassed security protocols using a vulnerability she noticed in the building's HVAC system, a digital tunnel leading straight to the black box that recorded executive activity. The moment she found the command, user J-Cross execute data siphon, her screen went black. A red skull appeared. Then her phone rang. "You're very curious," Paul said smoothly. "And very predictable." Fear chilled her, but her voice stayed steady. "You stole from Apex. And you're about to take the fall," he replied. "Check your email." The fabricated confession hit her like a blow. Fake accounts. Fake transfers. Her name on every line. By the time security stormed the floor, she was already running. Hours later, in a dim diner across the bay, Sarah worked furiously on an ancient laptop, peeling apart metadata from the files Paul forged. She found the signature, an embedded printer ID from his private office. Proof he had planted everything. And then she found something worse. Titan Corp's press release. A groundbreaking communication breakthrough scheduled in 2 days. Technology suspiciously similar to the code she fixed. He wasn't just stealing. He was selling. And the exchange would take place where no one would question a private conversation. The Apex Annual Innovation Gala. Sarah scrubbed the dye into her hair, secured the catering uniform, and slipped into the opera house under a false name. Inside the glittering ballroom, the chandelier lights shimmered across gold trim and marble floors. Arthur stood at the entrance greeting donors, unaware of the betrayal unfolding beneath his nose. Paul moved through the crowd like a man basking in applause he hadn't earned. Sarah watched him steer the Titan CEO toward the East Wing. This was it. She abandoned her tray, crept toward the hallway, and caught the door before it latched. Their voices were clear. "The drive contains everything," Paul said. 50 million wired to the Caymans. She lifted her phone to record, but the device let out a sharp beep. Paul spun. "Someone's here." Sarah ran. The ballroom erupted into chaos as Paul pointed her out. Security advanced. Guests pulled back. But she pushed through them, gripping the recording in her hand. "Arthur," she shouted. "Check his pocket." When Arthur hesitated, Paul grabbed Arthur's wife, pressing a knife to her throat. Panic surged through the room. Sarah didn't think. She calculated. She seized a heavy silver tray, pivoted and launched it upward. Not at Paul, but at the chandelier bolt above him. Snap. The chandelier crashed down, exploding between Paul and his hostage. The shockwave knocked him backward, and Arthur lunged, tackling him to the floor. Security swarmed. Arthur reached into Paul's jacket and pulled out the silver flash drive. The room erupted. Not in applause, but in the unmistakable shift of power returning to the rightful hands. Paul's smirk was gone, replaced by the hollow stare of a man who realized the world he built on lies was collapsing. And this collapse was only the beginning. In the weeks that followed the gala, the storm around Apex finally quieted. Investigators released their findings, and the charges against Sarah disappeared as quickly as they had been fabricated. What remained was the imprint of a truth no one at the company could ignore. She hadn't just repaired a system. She had exposed the rot that nearly swallowed it. Sarah didn't step back into the shadows as some expected. Instead, she walked through the lobby each morning with a steadiness that made people lift their heads when she passed. Not out of fear. Out of respect. She had earned that in a way no title ever could. Her new division grew faster than anyone predicted. Former outsiders, brilliant minds dismissed for lacking the right background, now filled the room with ideas that reshaped the company's future. Sarah watched them work with a quiet pride, recognizing pieces of her own journey in every determined face. One evening, long after the offices had emptied, she paused by the large window overlooking the city. The lights flickered across the skyline like a map of choices, each one leading her here, to a place she once believed was closed to people like her. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that courage didn't always roar. Sometimes it spoke in a single moment when someone refused to stay silent. As she turned off the final lamp, the reflection on the glass caught the faint outline of the old receipt framed on her wall, a reminder of the night everything shifted. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Canada's Heartfelt Tales so more voices like hers can be heard.